Okay. Good morning. I'm delighted at the theme of this fourth DCU Climate and Society Conference, Climate Justice Across Generations, as this has been a passion of mine for a very long time. As you've heard, I do sometimes call myself an angry granny. And of course, I was very pleased when the Swiss grannies succeeded in the first case before the Court of Human Rights in proving that Switzerland was failing to protect their human rights and therefore making that connection between climate and human rights. Since we're talking about cross generations, let me just reflect for a moment and tell you something you probably don't know about me, and that is that when I was a young teenager and a not-so-young teenager and beginning in college, I was very, very shy. But I was also very keen to be heard, to get my voice out. And I remember taking part in debates and going completely blank, very embarrassing. Some of you may have had that experience, but it's not funny when it happens. And I just kept going, kept forcing myself until I mastered not going blank. And I think it's important to kind of realize that people may be a bit different from what you thought they were. And certainly, I very much want to emphasize the importance, and I'll come back to that, of intergenerational discussions. And why is climate justice across generations so important? Actually, the elders, the group of former leaders that Nelson Mandela brought together in 2007, we believe very strongly in intergenerational discussion, intergenerational conversation, because the generations learn from each other. If you go into the website of the elders, which is theelders.org, you'll see blogs by young people, and you'll see a great deal of intergenerational conversation, because as elders, we realize the world has changed. Young people are very socially connected. They communicate across the world in a way that wasn't possible when we were growing up. And there's a real sense of identifying with those who are more affected and need the attention of other young people who want their own countries to change, but also have a sense of that sort of solidarity with younger people. I was very happy in the green room before I came to meet three young people, Niamh, Conor and Ailey, who had taken part in the first Children and Young People's Assembly on biodiversity loss. I remember being so pleased that Ireland gave leadership again in having that assembly, the first, I think, in the world. And I actually did a video to express my happiness about that. But I asked the three of them this morning, I said, tell me something that I don't know, because I know you can, about biodiversity loss. And they came up with something. They came up with the fact that we only have 1% of the original woodland of Ireland still with us. We've lost 99%, in other words. That's a very shocking figure in itself, and it's part of why we need to be very regenerative now in everything we do in relation to our soil and our biodiversity. So let me come now to climate justice, which I've been thinking about for a very long time, partly because I was aware when I was President of Ireland, I didn't say anything about climate. It wasn't an issue then. And then afterwards, in 1997, I became the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, and I became aware that climate was very serious, that we were in a climate crisis, but another part of the UN was dealing with it. And I didn't see any relevance to my quite large portfolio of human rights, gender equality, rights of indigenous peoples, rights of people with disabilities. It was afterwards when I formed a small NGO that worked in African countries on the rights that really matter if you don't have them, rights to food, water, health, education. And I was stunned. This was about 2003, 2004 and onwards. I was really stunned at how bad the climate impacts were at that time in African countries. Women kept saying to me, is God punishing us? There were huge droughts or flooding, or the rainy seasons didn't come. Whatever, every part of Africa you went to, they were talking nervously and anxiously about the impacts of something they didn't understand. Very often they didn't know it was climate. They just knew that as farmers, everything had changed for the worse. And that brought me to not talking about climate change, but talking about climate justice, because I saw the injustices. The first injustice is that climate shocks have affected the poorest countries, poorest communities, small island states, and indigenous peoples for far, far longer. And they actually happen to be the black and brown and indigenous people in our world. So there's a kind of racial injustice there as well. Secondly, within that, there's a huge gender injustice, which I saw very vividly in African countries. Women have different social roles very often, different power, different access to credit, different access to training, different access to the table of decision-making. Thirdly, the intergenerational injustice. And I've been a passionate advocate for future generations. Now that voice is very loud with Greta Thunberg and millions of other young people, and the three young people I met this morning. Children and young people are saying, you're not still giving us a safe world for our future. We can't do it. And the injustice is we know it needs to be done, but we simply are not at the table. There's another injustice which is more subtle. It's the injustice of the pathways to development of different regions of the world. We were lucky in Ireland. We industrialized. We built our economy on fossil fuel. So did most of Europe, so did the United States, Korea, Japan, etc. Our responsibility, therefore, is to wean ourselves off more rapidly than we're doing. But developing countries want to develop. And now we're saying, because of our overuse of carbon, you can't actually exploit the oil and gas that you have. And actually, if they do, it will hit them first because they are more vulnerable and the cost will be higher. But we're not giving them the capacity to move more rapidly to clean energy. We're beginning. We're beginning with, in Glasgow, South Africa got a commitment to help them get out of coal. In Bali, a year later at COP27, Indonesia got a bit of help. And we're beginning. We should have been doing it far, far more support for developing countries to develop leapfrog into clean development. And the fifth injustice is, of course, the injustice to nature herself, which I won't go into in detail because I hope it'll be very much part of your theme. And I'm so glad that Ella Saltmarsh will focus on long-term thinking, because that also is something that the elders have recently been promoting very strongly. What we call for is long-view leadership. And long-view leadership is leadership that actually tries to address very serious existential threats, like the climate and nature crisis, like the pandemic crisis, because we still are not coming well out of COVID. We're not ready for the next pandemic. And thirdly, nuclear weapons. So we want long-view leadership, looking also at the potential of artificial intelligence across those three existential threats. So where are we now, and why am I so passionate about Project Dandelion? I gave the three young people a badge like the one I'm wearing this morning, and there are a few badges to spare, which I want to go mainly to young people if they want to get them. And I said I'd explain it in my speech. But let's first of all get a sense of where we are. We're actually on the cusp of a clean energy, safer, healthier, much fairer world. We're actually moving a bit faster, but we're not moving nearly fast enough for the science. And unfortunately, the science is going worryingly the wrong way, as I'm sure many of you will know. The oceans are warming, the coral reefs are under threat, everything is more serious. And unfortunately, one of the blocks to moving faster is where the money is going. In our very strange world at the moment, do you know that we spend $1.8 trillion every year on what is harming us? Fossil fuel in particular, and other harmful measures. So if we could switch that money, it would help enormously, obviously. And we need to know our power, basically. There are so many people around the world. I'm fortunate to know quite a lot of them. I met many of them at the School Forum in Oxford last week, who are working very hard to get clean energy at grassroots level, to deal with biodiversity, to work on innovation, to work on, and this includes, in particular, the indigenous communities, young people, business leaders who are on the right side, and there are a lot of them, entrepreneurs, philanthropists, artists, filmmakers, etc., all moving but not connected, not sensing that there's a powerful movement that governments should be really listening to that's on the right side of this. And therefore, I believe we need a symbol. Now, why am I so focused on symbols? Actually, I learned a big lesson when I was elected president in 1990. I said, as some of you will recall, that I would put a light in the window of Áras an Uachtaráin for all of those who'd had to leave Ireland over the centuries. And frankly, I totally underestimated that light. It took a life of its own. It worked 24/7, and it created an Irish diaspora. There wasn't any sense of that. The word wasn't used. But somehow there was a sense. I never actually got to mention that light when I visited the United States, when I visited Canada, Australia, Argentina, parts of Europe, etc., because people would say to me, "We know you have a light in the window and it matters so much to us." That was the way in which the light worked. We need a symbol that will unite us on the right side of the issue to combat the very powerful fossil fuel lobby. I mean, let me give you just another figure. It's estimated that the fossil fuel lobby spends $4 billion a year on undermining all the efforts, muddying the science, delaying things, pretending, doing PR, stupid stuff. And that's very powerful, and it's not countered properly by a huge communications on the right side. So we've come up with the dandelion. I'm going to tell you a few things about the dandelion. It grows on all continents. It's very resilient. Well, we know that because you can't get rid of the damn thing if you want to, can you? I mean, it's just, it keeps coming back to its credit. And thirdly, it's very regenerative of the soil. It's got deep roots. You can eat and drink every part of the dandelion in salads and soups and wine. And also, the roots of the dandelion actually take toxins out of the human body. And how do you spread it? So we are increasingly seeing the need for leadership using this symbol. And because it was a group of women leaders who came up with it, we've decided to give women leadership on a broad climate justice movement, which is very inclusive of all the elements that I was talking about earlier. Women-led, but not women only. And more men, I'm happy to say, are wearing the dandelion. If you Google Project Dandelion or go online or whatever, you'll find out more about it. I think I've probably spoken enough about it at this stage. And I actually want to end with a very appropriate saying, which was a favourite saying of Kofi Annan. Archbishop Tutu was the first chair of the elders. Kofi Annan was my boss when I worked as UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. And then he became the second chair of the elders. And I used to hear him in particular say it in that capacity, and with a big smile on his face, he would say, "You are never too young to lead, and you are never too old to learn." So now I think it's time for my conversation. Thank you very much.
Mary, thank you so much for that wonderful contribution, and welcome again to DCU on behalf of everyone. Mary has agreed to take some questions, so please put your thinking caps on. I'm sure there will be lots of questions. Can I start off? You were backstage at the time, but in my opening remarks I referred to the Summit of the Future taking place in New York this September. Can I ask you about your thoughts on that and hopes for what that might achieve?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a difficult time to plan something like a Summit of the Future because we have a very divided world, geopolitical shifts going on, 2 very worrying wars, and then neglected other wars like Sudan or Myanmar, etc. So it's not a happy place at all. There is a sense of double standards. There's a lot of anger. The one thing I would say, and I hope I'm not being too hopeful on this, but I think the one thing that might get through the Summit of the Future is the proposal for an envoy on future generations. And actually, when I had my foundation on climate justice, which came to a planned end because we achieved what we wanted to achieve, one of our things was this envoy for future generations. But we felt so many young people now are speaking out, making that case. Maybe we don't need the envoy, but actually we do. It will be very helpful. I'm sure Ella will build on this point.
Thank you. So I'll now open up to the audience. I can see so that we have some roving mics left and right and up in the balcony as well. So this gentleman in the front here. Yes, yeah. Please use the mic.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary Robinson, very much for all you've done to raise our awareness and change the world. I'd like to ask about language, perhaps a little bit, because I don't think the language is very radical. And I think we need a revolution. I think we need a revolution of systems. And I think it's important that leaders, like all of the people who have been on stage this morning, tell us like it is. Because I don't think it's technology that's going to save us. I don't think it's institutions, and I don't think it's money. I think it's human beings changing their behavior and remembering that we are human and finding a different vision of the future. And I'd like to know what sort of language you'd like to use. We talk about human rights, and 2 big human rights which aren't really addressed. The right to live, which you spoke about in Africa, people not having food, not having water, not having houses, and the right to die. Euthanasia is something that, again, we should address in the context of our systems. But would you like to say some very radical, revolutionary things? We had some Brigidine elders standing up and saying, I want a revolution. They were very reluctant because it's such a radical word. In the end, they said, I want a revolution of love. And to me, that sounded like a very good solution to our problems. What do you think?
I think it's pretty revolutionary to have a climate justice women-led movement, which is what Project Dandelion is all about, and that tries to unite in a way that grows our power, all of those who are on the right side of this, because we know the very strong resistance of the fossil fuel lobby. It's not going to be easy. So that to me is quite a revolutionary idea. I think it's one that is very human because it's very, very inclusive. It's inclusive of all of the people I mentioned, the indigenous communities, young people, entrepreneurs, women at grassroots level, philanthropists, business people. You know, we all need to make those links together. We're not making them. Universities need to link as thought leaders on this, as they should be. But to me, that's as revolutionary as we need to be.
We have another question here.
Thank you. Hello, my name's Deirdre Mortel from Rethink Ireland.
Can you put up your hand because I can't see? Oh, there we are.
Yeah, I'm here, thanks. So thank you for making the time to come today. Not many people know that only 2% of global philanthropy goes to climate change and the green transition. And I guess we work a lot with philanthropists, and we really see how in Ireland, firstly, I think it's way, way less than that. And we're not really seeing that shift in Ireland, where when I talk to philanthropists, I feel that they can't really see a place for themselves within the movement, and they don't really have a vision of what role they could play and how they could really try and accelerate the things that need to be done. And I wonder, could you articulate a vision for the role that philanthropy could play that might help to galvanise that? Thank you.
It's a very interesting point, because I kind of more or less agree with you. So many philanthropies want projects that they can assess the impact, and they can blah, 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 and it's a lot of paper filling, and a lot of it is unnecessary. They're not kind of really understanding our world in a way that would enable philanthropy to be that flexible, vital funding. For example, we're finding it quite difficult to get funding for Project Dandelion. They don't want to fund a movement. Well, movements are too difficult, they're too unpredictable. I mean, what's a movement? And so there is a difficulty. Nonetheless, for example, in the Skoll Forum last week, you had 1,400 or 1,500 people, all of them, sort of very much on the side of the right thing to do, brought together by a philanthropy established by Jeff Skoll. He was one of the founders of eBay, and he put all his money into founding the Skoll Forum. And it has, it's been growing and growing each year. And it's a great place for people to meet and exchange and reinvigorate themselves. But I think a lot of philanthropies still don't get it, that the major crisis for us is the climate and nature crisis. They just don't get it. They want to do education. Yes, they should do all of that, but on top of that, they should move flexibly. And also, just talking about money, so little money goes to those who are working on the ground, particularly, local communities, women's groups, etc., making their communities resilient. Less than 2% of all climate funding goes in that direction from climate, from the 100 billion and so on.
We have a question down here. Before I bring you in, can I just say, with the stage lights, it's quite hard for me to see people up in the balcony. So if there's anyone in the balcony that's trying to get my attention, can you wave so that I can see you? So yeah, we have a question here.
Hi, my name is Anya Dempsey, and I'm a law student here at DCU, but I'm also one of the founding members of Fridays for Future Ireland. And as you know, along with your support as well, since 2019, we've been working tirelessly with the intergenerational activists already present here in Ireland at the time, to get climate change back on the table as an international and national priority. We found, obviously, since COVID, that's taken a serious hit, and the global climate, in a non-environmental sense, has also changed dramatically. So do you have any words of wisdom or reflections on how to bring us back to having climate change be amongst the main topics of conversation, and for the younger generations, of course, how to find the strength to continue this fight after yonks of doing it, really?
Well, thank you for the question, and congratulations on having been one of the founders of Fridays for Future in Ireland. It's actually an extremely important movement, and I think at the moment, if I could put it this way, it's a kind of bruised movement, isn't it? Because so much effort has gone in, and so little seems to be coming the right way. We're not seeing a real, getting faster in reaching this much better, healthier world that I mentioned that we're on the cusp of. There are various things. The Ukraine war didn't help either. Europe went backwards. The fact that farmers are suffering, and they're suffering greatly in this country, from exactly what was predicted. much greater precipitation, meaning more rain, more flooding. And it's very sad to hear the stories at the moment. And I think we really have to incentivize heavily to move in the right direction more. I sometimes feel that we need to spend our children's and our grandchildren's money more now, or our children and grandchildren won't have the future they want. It's as simple as that. So we need to get much more incentives, much more focus on what does it take you to move now into a different way of doing. And we all need to change our behaviour. As Tara Shine, who worked with me, said the other day, I heard her on RTE, it takes time and it's hard to change behaviour. But actually we did it during COVID. We learned new tricks. We wore masks, we didn't shake hands, we didn't hug each other, we did these tests all the time, etc., etc. So it is possible if we have enough sense of urgency. And I think what we need is everyone at every level who has any responsibility to have that sense of urgency that we are in a climate and nature crisis. And at the moment we're losing because we're not moving fast enough. And that, so it's not just at government and Oireachtas level, it's also at local authority level, at city level. We need a leadership that has a real sense of urgency, that incentivises, the refitting of houses and making them climate-proof, etc., all of that. And then the other side, real focus on restoring and regenerating biodiversity. I think it's a question of urgency and leadership are the two things. And hopefully Fridays for Future will persist and, renew itself with a real strong sense of purpose. We need to hear the voices of young people. We need, because the scientists are becoming more and more also bruised and frustrated that their voice isn't being taken seriously enough. So I'm hoping that this Project Dandelion movement approach will gradually have us, as I say, grow our power together, become more excited about it. We need to get excited about this future that's just around the corner, but we're not moving fast enough.
Thank you.
There's a question towards the back on the right here.
Hi, my name is Emma Alzon, and I've worked in sustainability for about 15 to 20 years now. I'm currently working for Uisce Éireann, and one of the things that you mentioned was about focusing on long-term thinking. And in the Dáil, with our political system, it's a real challenge to have that long-term thinking. It's often around electoral cycles, and you can see the backtracking forward and back when these things happen. How can we get our politicians to engage in that long-term thinking and think more than their tenant in the Dáil, for example?
Well, that's really very much what the elders are pleading for, if you like, urging, advocating for at the global, but also the national and even local level. Long-term thinking, as I mentioned earlier, means trying to solve problems, not just manage and push them aside. It means listening to the science and reason, and it means listening to people, listening to everyone kind of affected, and with some humility, to make sure that the approach is the right one. But we do need long-term thinking, and unfortunately, because of social media, 24/7, we've more and more tendency towards populist solutions, which are really very seriously dangerous because they're not thought through, they're not based, but they get large followings, and the person thinks they're great because they've come up with this solution, which isn't a solution. And so we really need thoughtful, mature kind of sense, and I'm sure Ella will build on this as well because she's very much engaged in it. It's absolutely vital in dealing with threats that we can't deal with alone, which are the climate and nature crisis, pandemic crisis, nuclear weapons crisis, for that matter.
Great. Sorry, yes, the gentleman here in the middle.
Hello. Yeah, thank you, Mary. A very good presentation and well done in your work. I was on Tosca a few years ago trying to influence people. Christy Moore in particular didn't quite get him, but I think he maybe has done a song on climate change. What about politicians cycling to meetings? I'm thinking of Mark Rutte in The Hague. Leonardo DiCaprio is doing something. But what about big people and political people setting a good example, maybe going to Brussels overland, not flying, setting an example in terms of their diet? If people in authority, influential people, would set an example in their own lives, would that not help us to see the urgency of climate change and take action?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think we do need that. Personally, we don't have a car anymore. I take public transport as much as possible, bus and train. I have to fly because very often I'm flying with a tight schedule. That's the problem. If you're doing a lot, you haven't got time to do the slow travel. Let me just mention, because I'm so impressed by it, I'm taking part in a music festival in Galway on the 18th of May, and it's a slow music festival, they're calling it. It's very focused on climate and migration, and nobody coming from outside Ireland should come and anybody in Ireland should travel by public transport to Galway for it. That's a good example of artists persuading us. And art is so important in this, because I keep saying, and it's true, you don't move people with statistics or even frightening them with the crisis that we're in. You move people from the heart. And art actually is a great way of moving people from the heart. And I think that's really a vital component.
Great. There's a question here.
Thanks very much. Noel Buckley, I'm chair at Clonmel Town Team, and I'm very interested in what you said about art. I met an artist at the Ploughing Championship last year, and she had an interesting line. She said, artists are people who build bridges to an unimagined future. Artists are people who build bridges to an unimagined future. And in a way, that's the situation we're in. We can't imagine a future that is green. To give you an example, in Clonmel, thanks to the Minister for the Environment, Eamon Ryan, we got a local town bus service. Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of people before it came in said it would never be used. It started just this Christmas, and already it has carried 24,000 passengers. So that imagined future, in terms of leadership. Yeah. But then again, you look at the leadership we have. I come from a farming background, originally grew up on a farm. I'm saddened by the farm leadership who want the system to stay as it is. So my question to you is, I suppose, and I find dealing with local government, my role as chair of the town team now, is the reluctance to jump into that unimagined future. How do we get people out of what I call the silo thinking, or we have to have the car in the town centre, whatever it may be. Farmers still have to have a dairy and cattle system. It's the only system we know. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question and the way you put it. Maybe, and I'm not being kind of flippant here, but maybe we need a more imagined future. We need to talk more about where we want to be. And it is what you're saying, that towns would have public transport, that rural areas would also have access to public transport, that, all the things that need to change, and that we need to hurry, all of us, urgently, everybody doing what they can and doing what they should, to reach this imagined future, which will be so much healthier. We won't have the pollution of fossil fuel that kills a lot of people in Ireland, but globally kills more people than COVID every year. We have to really think about what it will be like when we have, like at the very beginning of COVID. Do you remember how the air was so fresh? We could hear the birds. It was a really insightful moment. We need to really imagine and believe in this future much more. But thank you for your question.
There's one question up on the balcony, and this, I'm sorry to say, will have to be the last question. We're pretty much out of time. So,
hello, Mary. Thanks very much for your interesting speech. It's Coleman O'Sullivan here from RTE News. We've had Ireland's youngest ever Taoiseach elected recently. Would you have any advice for him or any requests of him?
That's a very dangerous question to put to an ear uachtaráin, for goodness sake. I think, Ireland to its credit, has good climate policies, but Ireland is not implementing. I mean, the fact that we're on track... The fact that we're on track for a 29% reduction rather than a 50% reduction by 2030 is not good. I mean, as I said, we're a country that benefited from fossil fuel. We have that responsibility. We should be doing far more real, tangible stuff at every level, in every capacity, at local level, at regional level, at national level. And we should be, as I say, incentivizing more, spending more money cleverly now, because otherwise the future will be even more grim for farmers and grim for others. So time is of the essence. The urgency is there, and I think we have a beautiful island. We could make it the greenest, most sustainable island in the world, and everybody would benefit, and that's what I'd love to see.
It's been a wonderful opening to our conference. I can think of no better way to start our discussions for today. It's been an honour to have you here in DCU. So, Mayor Robinson, thank you very much for joining us.